Welcome to another Thursday with Third Path webinar. We have someone who I consider kind of a star in the Third Path community joining us today. She wrote a book a number of years ago that did an amazing job, both explaining why it's so challenging to follow an integrated approach to work and life, yet so possible. And she did it in a way that was really accessible by telling her story and her husband's story, because clearly that's an important part of the change process, that this is a men's and women's issue. And then she linked it back to these larger forces that show us why change can be challenging, even today, 10 years after she wrote this book. But why we hope by listening into today's webinar, you'll be inspired about how you can take some steps right now to make more change happen in your life, and just as importantly, how the steps you take today to embrace integration will help make it easier for our sons and daughters. So welcome, Kristin. We are so happy you are here. Tell us a little bit about, what it was like when you got this book out there. What was the kind of reaction you got? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the stories that you tell in this book.
Well, I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you again. It feels like good timing for you to have reached out to do this. The reaction to the book was very positive in the sense that, the women that I talked with and heard from at that time when the book came out, just sort of opened up their stories to me because I had been so vulnerable in sharing my story, and the good and the bad. I was just really humbled and appreciative that when I interacted with the people that were reading the book, they were so open with their story. And that, I think, was part of the power to give them the opening to tell their story. And then the other reaction that I found really interesting is I had a lot of women talk to me about they would highlight sections of the book and hand it to their husband, right? And that they knew that their husband wouldn't read the whole book, right? But something that hit hard for them, really resonated, they would like highlight a paragraph and be like, just read this. Like it was their way of having a voice and articulating it and starting a conversation within the house. And so I was really surprised and heartened by that.
Yeah. And probably one thing you've learned now that, again, many years have gone by since the book was written, is that it's not like the issues you raised in the book suddenly were no longer relevant in your life. And that, kids get older. I'm now even an empty nester and dealing with some of these issues. Are any surprises as things have changed over the course of your career and life around balancing work and life?
Surprises. So many. So the surprise is that there are so many surprises, right? We'll talk about a little bit, but some of the ones that come to mind for me personally are sort of the surprise of what it meant when our daughter added her own workload. And I mean that in terms of when she entered middle school and high school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like we hadn't anticipated, like, oh, wait, there's a third person in the family that effectively has a workload, right? On them.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Surprises in terms of the degree to which we would have to adapt our careers, even once we sort of set up and got to what we thought was the happy ending, like the recession hit, right? Yeah. It's like, oh crap, now what do we do? And then surprises in terms of the kinds of caregiving that come into your life, mental health issues, elderly parents, right? Health crises. It was the surprises of life, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think, the message we've been trying to talk about all year long is that clearly what you're going to hear in Kristin's story is that there were some really tough struggles early on. And we're going to talk very specifically about some of those really hard moments, because that's part of trying to follow an integrated life in today's world is still kind of challenging. But here's a question. You took on some hard battles way back when. Do you think because you addressed those challenges early on, that the kind of things that you and David figured out ended up continuing to be really helpful as you hit those next life stages?
Absolutely. In fact, he and I were just talking about this over dinner last night, about how we're just about to be an empty nest ourselves, so we're watching other families around us in that sort of same stage as well. And we were talking about how, having done some really hard work in those, I would say those first 4 or 5 years of our daughter's life, at a time when both of us, first of all, still really valued our marriage. Like, we're not willing to sacrifice that to anything. And we were young enough to experiment with some things, and have some hard conversations that we wouldn't have survived, I don't think, a hit like the recession, or a hit like his father-in-law's brain injury, or, some of these big things that came our way, without having built the conversational muscle and the shared agreement about what we wanted early on. And we're now seeing families around us sort of approaching that empty nest thing. And, we hear about this. It's, we have friends for whom they haven't had that opportunity for a lot of reasons, right? To have those hard conversations. And now they're approaching some big challenges, some empty nest, and really much later in life having to figure out, how do we build that conversational muscle? What do we care about? And it's harder at that stage, frankly.
Yeah.
More time has passed. There's more water under the bridge, right? More baggage on all fronts.
Yep.
And it's just harder.
Oh, amen. Amen. So if you're listening in today, either live or the recording, please, you might want to avoid the difficult conversation, but we hope today's webinar helps you be inspired that it's not always easy to set up life the way you want around work and family, but taking on some of those more difficult conversations sooner pays lots of dividends over the life course. We were going to talk a little bit about how things are still really challenging today, even though it's 10 years after your book, but I have to keep one eye on the clock, so I'm going to move us on to the next slide to talk about, we use a mobile at Third Path to kind of explain how there's this multiple forces that can make it difficult for families to balance work and family in a way that's most satisfying for them. And at the top of the mobile are obviously the ones that have kind of the biggest impact on people. If we could actually get some good public policy, it'd have a huge impact on a whole lot of people. If we could actually change the cultural norms so it becomes much more typical for men to be involved with caregiving as women, boy, would that have a huge impact on things. And I joke, and I don't know if you've seen this, Kristin, in the last 10, 15 years, yes, technology has helped us in so many ways, but I never realized we'd get to a point in time where people can't even turn off work on vacation, or too many people can. So technology has been this double-edged sword that really has had a huge impact on our lives, and of course our organizations. So, your book does a great job talking a little bit about this. Maybe one way we could tie it into how things change or not change. When you think about where things were around these big forces back when you wrote the book, any insights about how things maybe have moved in a positive direction, or maybe any insights about how things are still stuck in the same place?
Well, you want me to be hopeful, right?
No, you don't have to hear.
Yeah, no. I am generally. I mean, listen, the way I see it, listen, at the core, some of these bigger structures, the public policy stuff, organizations haven't done much changing in ways that really impact large numbers of people, right?
Yeah.
You might get one organization doing a great thing or whatever, but it's not a consistent kind of thing yet. Yeah. What I do think is changing and has changed is I actually find the millennial generation extremely hopeful as a force within this mobile, because they are very large. There's a lot of them. They come to parenthood, family, part of their lives with very different expectations, both men and women. And they're not afraid to ask for it. And I know that there are negative knocks on that generation, but I actually think they're one of our sort of greatest hopes for bringing in a large set of people for whom the cultural norms are already different. Yep. Right? They're already operating on at least somewhat different cultural norms. Yep. And I just think that's going to have a positive impact, and that it's really the cultural piece that has to change before the organizations and the public policy will change anyway.
Yep. And we are definitely going to circle to that. Yep. Well said. Hey, thank you. Look at you keeping a focused, positive moment right there about the millennials. I
There you
couldn't
go.
agree more. And and I do think that because there's so many of them, that will help a whole lot. And then we can add to that group. I think baby boomers are saying, I don't want to just drop out of the workforce when I retire. I'd like to phase into retirement, or I'd like to leave this full-time job and go to this other creative part-time experience. So I do think there's another generation who is going to help us
Agreed.
reshape things too. Perhaps both sides of the generations are going to help us make some change. So
Yes.
cool. Well, the big message, the big takeaway from today's call is that yes, there are these external factors that can really make it difficult for you to follow an integrated approach, whether that's because you don't have kids yet or you are never planning to have kids and you want to have time for something else in your life, or whether you're full on into the family life years, or whether you're whatever stage trying to balance work and the care, aging parents or whatever. You are going to face these external factors, and the more you can get clear about what's happening for you personally, what's a priority for you personally, the more it's going to really help you make wise choices around how to manage these external barriers. And that's exactly what we're going to hear in Kristin's story. So again, I just want to kind of talk about the dimensions that people need to think about as they are exploring an integrated approach. There's what's happening on the work side, the family side, and in your organization. And all three impact how you're going to set up an integrated life. What's interesting when you hear Kristin walk through her story, they already were way ahead of the game, thinking differently about how to do work and careers differently. And they were actually pretty much, one could argue, on the same page of thinking differently about family. But one of the first stumbling blocks that they encountered was really trying to find a workplace that supported them to follow this more integrated approach to work and family. And so that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about is, when you hit that barrier, what can you do? We hope some of the stories you hear today will inspire you, and we definitely want to encourage you to ask some questions. Again, you might not have a thought you want to add to this particular document. If you do, I'd love to hear it, Kristin, but if you don't, no problem.
We're good. Let's go.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is talk about Kristin's story. Again, in that book that we showed you at the beginning of the webinar is a great book that provides all this information in the book. It's a great book. We use it at Third Path. And we're going to kind of walk you through her story to highlight a couple of important points. And that, basically we're going to start by saying, Kristin and David kind of wanted to set up their lives where they would have work and time for family. We call that shared care. It's one of the different ways that families can organize work and family. Number 4 on the right-hand side of the screen is shared care. But what happened was, because they hit some barriers, both Kristin and David at the workplace, they really ended up in a model where Kristin was doing the bulk of the caregiving, David was doing the bulk of the earning income. How did you get to that place? That's what we want to hear next. And just before you get there, just to highlight, so as you're listening in today, you might fall into any one of those 5 categories of how you can balance work and family, and you might be very happy with the solution that you've gotten to. Third Path is trying to help people really consider the shared care option, where in a 2-parent household, if it's mom and dad or dad and dad, they both figure out how to redesign work so they can both share in the care of their kids. And we actually know a lot of divorced families where they continue to share care too. But Kristin, so how did you get to that preferred versus reality situation?
Yeah, I was going to say, to your point, we were awfully smug going into having a child, right? We were like, oh, we'll both keep our careers. We're different. Times are different, and we really literally had this conversation of whenever we do have kids, we'll aim to work like 70, 75 hours a week combined. We both want to have time with our kid and time for our careers. We all want to be home for family dinners. Like, we actually had an intentional conversation before we had kids, and we're pretty smug about our ability to do it, frankly.
Yeah.
And when I got pregnant, I almost immediately made a proposal to go part-time at my employer that I'd been at for years and was flatly turned down. So I scrambled and actually managed to find another part-time job during my pregnancy. And so again, we continued with this, oh, smug, this will be fine kind of thought about our situation. My husband at the time, David, was working 70-hour work weeks as a new attorney. And when our daughter arrived, he had to go back to work 5 days after she was born, or he would risk losing his annual bonus. Like, things were set up in such a way that he could not take leave without losing a good chunk of income. And so, and then 3 months later, right, I showed up for that first day back at my part-time job, and I got laid off the same day. So 3 months in, we're sitting at the kitchen table and like, what the heck just happened, right?
Yeah.
And we did the math, childcare, taxes, work expenses, and frankly, it didn't seem worth it for me to work. And I talk a lot about that in my book. And even how would I get a job when I had a newborn and no one to take care of her while I job searched because he was working all the time?
Yeah.
So we made a decision that I wouldn't work for a while. And so, it was kind of like so much for the modern marriage and family thing. We looked like something out of the 1950s, literally like 90 days, right, from the day she was born.
Yeah.
And it made us both insane in different ways.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that because, again, we are going to circle back to this very big road hazard. Here you tried your very best to set up a work solution that would support you to have time to do work and family, and we're going to definitely make sure we come back to that one. But I do want to talk a little bit about what it felt like suddenly being home alone in a way you didn't anticipate, and home alone where the other partner had very long work hours. And so I put up one of the quotes that I use in our case study when we write up your amazing book and use it to train our integrated life advocates as career counselors and couples counselors who help us with our work. Whoa, I love that. Until about 4:30 p.m. Tell us.
Right, everybody knows the witching hour, right? Yeah, I mean, here I was. I never imagined in my life that I would be full-time caring for an infant. Never. And I had, a very robust career. I liked the things I did for work, and it just overnight, I could barely get a shower. Like, that was an accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
And my husband and I had always done everything together. We were absolutely a team, and all of a sudden, he was never around, and I was completely on my own with this thing I felt terrible at, this motherhood thing.
Yeah.
And so, at about 4:30 every day, I would go out in the grass in our front lawn with Kate, and I was exhausted and frustrated, and I would start calling him. When are you going to be home? When are you going to be home? When are you going to be home? Right? And of course, he took that very well. I'm sure you can imagine, because he's trying to get things done. He's trying actually to get home, but he's got to get things done. So he's frustrated with me, and he would often say, you know what, it's going to be 8 or 9. And I'd be like, fine, I don't even care if you come home then, because by then it doesn't matter. By then it doesn't help, right? I'll be in bed, she'll be in bed, you can't help me. And so it was just this, everything, I felt like I lost my marriage, I lost my career, I lost my identity, who I thought I was, all these huge losses. And the one person in my life that I'd always counted on to process things with was one of the things I lost.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what we want to talk about.
It was just devastating.
Yeah. We want to talk about that because what you do an amazing job is being really transparent about how hard this was for you and also how hard this was for David. And I am going to put up a quote about that in a second, but I want to test something out here because sometimes what people hear is, infant care is exhausting and that's all they hear. But I would argue it's that infant care is exhausting when you're left alone with it, especially when you're left alone with it for a very long day, day after day. And that's one of the things that we don't talk enough about around shared care is that, what it meant was I would get to that point where I was exhausted and I knew that I could count on Jeffrey to play a role to take over, and he was equally competent to take over. And I can remember one afternoon, for I don't remember why, but I was having a particularly hard day. I knew Jeff was going to get home around between 5 and 6. And basically, I confess, between 5 and 6, I pretty much just walked around the couch waiting for Jeff to get home so I could hand Jocelyn over to Jeff and I could walk out the door, because for whatever day, that was a hard day for me. But because I had a break as a parent, I think I also had a lot of joys being with the baby too. And that's what I like about this, is that you really had lots of joy there. It's when you go beyond that time that you're capable of handling it that it becomes more difficult. Does that sound familiar?
Absolutely. And the thing is that was the inner conflict for me. It's like I actually loved so much of the time I was spending, right? Yeah. And did feel, in fact, fortunate to have that time. And yet at the same time, I blamed my husband that I was miserable and I had lost all these other pieces of my life. Yeah. And that not only wasn't he around to share it, he wasn't even around for me to talk to about it. Yeah. Right. I didn't even have my partner available to talk to about, God, this is how I'm feeling about this. Yeah. Help me figure this out. Yeah. So it was that lack of a break and lack of that person that I could process it with. Yeah. That made it so difficult.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this one shared care dad who told this funny story about, having his wife come home and he's got throw up all over his shirt. And he says, his wife really understood what that day was like. When you show up at 5 and you still have throw up on your shirt, they understand. There's empathy about what that day was like.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things you talk about was how, again, because of where David was working, he was working very long hours. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. But he didn't even tell you that there was this one day where he really realized how much he was missing in not being involved at home. It sounds like that was an important part of the change process too.
It was huge, and one of the reasons that I didn't know about it till much later is precisely that I was spending all my time yelling at him and blaming him for my misery. And so it was very hard for me to get to a point to empathize with him. Yeah. And so this story, the first time I heard about this story was actually when we were in couples counseling together, because we wanted to figure out how to get out of this mess we'd gotten into. Yeah. And he talked about a time when we visited Minnesota together, all three of us, and that's where my family is. And he took her across the street to the park, and, it was just this beautiful parent moment, right? We've all probably had those where the sun is shining, the kid is happy. She's like, she may be a year old, right? And he choked up and he was near tears because he just realized that was the first time in her life so far that he'd had alone time with her that wasn't, a 2 a.m. feeding or something like that. Yeah. And hearing that story really changed my perspective and helped me understand that he was as miserable as I was. Yes. And that he had lost a bunch of things too, and was missing a bunch of things that I hadn't been able to see before. Yeah. And that was definitely a huge turning point for us and for me to realize that it wasn't all about me, and that blaming him wasn't getting me anywhere, because in fact we were both in the same boat. Yeah, thank you. And I want to really look at one more piece of this, because I think you've said something really powerful here that happens in too many households right now. So if you think about that mobile picture that we put up, there's these big forces at work that are really making it difficult to follow an integrated life. And it's negatively impacting men and women. And what unfortunately happens, though, is people don't know or think about that bigger picture. And so there's these arguments at home and blaming at home. So there's this fighting that's happening in our living rooms without perspective that there's these bigger forces that are making it difficult for both of us at home to do it the way we really want to do it, to the point where it sounds like you were really at a breaking point and you were about to take some steps that really would have taken you in a different direction. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the first year of her life, there was a point at which we argued, and I was like, he had just come back from like going to Korea for a trip and working a really long work week. And I just said to him, basically, listen, if you can't figure out a way to fix this and get more time at home with us. I'm leaving. I'm taking Kate. I'm going home to my family in Minnesota, and I need to get away from here.
Yeah.
So it was really the breaking point of our marriage. Like, I'm leaving this house unless you, right,
Yep.
fix this. And it was absolutely our marriage at stake at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, there was some hard work that had to happen next. I'm so glad you talked about how you got actually some support, external support. I think that's a really important message. Jeff and I have had difficult moments ourselves, and we've had to actually, sometimes it was to get on the same page around how to handle some child rearing situations, and we had to use this person that we would actually go back to every few years and say, hey, we got another question for you. So external support is really important.
Yes.
And I'm not going to take the whole end story away right now, but I do want to say by the end of the book, you guys had gotten to such a great place that you did something really sweet. I think you had a second celebration of some sort.
Yeah, my daughter named it the next wedding,
Mm-hmm.
and we had we literally threw a whole wedding. We had 150 people and all of our friends and family, and we renewed our original wedding vows, and we made new vows to each other as parents, and we made new promises to Kate. She was about 7 when we did it, and we still talk about it. It was a really hard thing to do. I mean, it was an expensive thing to do, right? A time-consuming thing to do, and but all 3 of us just treasure that public milestone and experience that solidified we'd come to the other side of this journey, and really marking those commitments we were making to each other and the progress. Yeah, it still tears me up. I was talking to my husband about it last night. It just all makes me teary up just thinking about it, how amazing it was.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wanted to share that with people because hopefully what you hear is even when you're at a breaking point and things are really, really bad, again, getting on the same page, using some external support to get on the same page can get you aligned to deal with the problems that are happening right at that moment and the problems that happen later on because you're both aligned in the same direction. And so even though I wish I could tell people something more huge, wonderful public policy is going to happen next year, today, what you can do is get aligned with your partner around what both your goals are. And if that feels hard, you can get some external support to get some alignment on your goals. And then you can once aligned, keep on using that to reach for what you both want. And what an amazing thing you've been modeling for Kate. Pretty fantastic. So wonderful.
Yeah.
So, all right. We're going to start talking a little bit about work and some of the things that Kristin was pushing up against. Kristin and David were pushing up against to imagine how they could do work and family differently. One of the things we've been doing all year long is talking about this. So you can look at some of our other webinars to learn some other things around, why integration is a good solution, how to push back at chronic overwork. We even have a webinar from last month specifically about becoming a parent. So we're really trying to give you lots of information this year about how you can go ahead and reach for these goals. We had the one in November is about early career. So even if you haven't thought about having kids yet, how you can make some changes even before you become a parent around following an integrated path. But one of the big challenges that I don't think, in hindsight we can see this, that, David was up against was we've done a lot of work with law firms over the last 15 years that we've been in existence at Third Path, 17 years. And, if you just look at law firms, you can see how this 24/7 technology has changed our approach to work. Luckily, we've met some law firms who are doing it differently, but law firms are a service industry. And depending on what kind of, law you're doing and who your clients are, too many law firms today have become this kind of crazy 24/7 workplace where people are doing enormous amounts of hours of work, working on weekends, working on vacations. And again, luckily, we're seeing a growing community of law firms doing things differently. But if you just look at law firms, and there's other reasons why this has happened too at law firms, but that kind of clients can access you 24/7, clients have lots of demands, partners have lots of demands, you make more money by working lots of hours, all those things come together and you get these crazy institutions where maybe 25 or 30 years ago, a lawyer could kind of end her work day at the more normal hours. They become these organizations that have these very demanding careers. So here is David, not working a 40-hour week or a 50-hour week, but a 70-hour week because of some very strong norms at his law firm. Does that sound familiar? And would you say technology was part of the problem? Not the whole problem, but part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think technology maybe is part of the problem. I think globalization is part of the problem. He did a lot of work with clients in Korea, so it's not, it is 24/7 because there are time zone issues. I also think part of the problem, and you're right, law firms are a particular nut to crack. Law firms are also another place where the concentration of people at the top who work 70 hours a week and have somebody else at home taking care of everything else that involves the family is very high. Yeah. So everyone David worked for had a wife at home who was not employed.
Yeah.
And so they literally didn't understand, right? His request to be like, you know what, going to Korea right now would be tough. And he would literally get the answer, well, I don't get it. Isn't your wife at home? Won't she just grin and bear it?
Yeah.
Right. So they had no concept.
Yeah.
To go on. So yes.
Yeah. So depending on where you work, there could be some pretty strong norms in the organization about, how you're supposed to approach work. And then, that probably existed for a long time. And then you add to this kind of assumption that you can work, with people literally across the globe, which means that you're working with these crazy different time zones and their norms, because and all that together makes it pretty challenging for us to create jobs that have more realistic expectations. But luckily, technology is this, double-edged sword. So there's a positive side too. I mean, because today, and again, we're going to get to your story today by the end, but there's some opportunities in how we can do work differently because of all this. And some organizations that are making it, taking advantage of those opportunities and creating a more flexible workplace. And so hopefully when we get to the end of your story, we're going to hear some more about how you guys have figured out how to make work better for you. One thing you'll hear as we get to that where the end was at the end of the book is that Kristin and David figured out how to start their own businesses. And again, that might not be something people listening in today feel like is an option for them or even something they want to go after. But certainly one thing we have heard at Third Path is starting your own business is a way to make work for you because you can make some choices around how to better manage what you take on and what you don't take on. So we're going to get to that kind of idea about one option is how you can kind of start your own business. The other is that workplaces are hopefully getting a little bit better, and we'll hear more about that at the end of the call. Any other thoughts about how work was challenging before I talk about the challenges fathers face around this? None required.
Right.
Any other thoughts?
I think you covered it. I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay, great. All right, so here we are trying to create change for moms, but if it's just moms who work flexibly, ask for reduced hour work, we're going to still have normal careers and then mom careers. And so Third Path has always been advocating that, hey, let's make this a mom and dad issue, an everybody issue, and really support men to ask for flexibility. We actually work with a lot of dads who actually have had success, maybe working a 4-day work week when a child is born. And so through gathering all these stories about men, we've seen some real patterns. I think, what I like and want to kind of focus on real quickly, and then I want to get your thoughts, is that, if you have somebody who is really supportive at home, but the workplace is not so supportive, you can still have a high probability of father involvement. And so I'd say that's the camp that you guys were in, versus you can have a supportive workplace, but you have a partner at home who's not really, or ambivalent maybe about, or even gatekeeping around giving up some of the role of parenting. Even in a supportive workplace, you're not going to really get dads involved in that situation. What do you think about that? Does that feel familiar to what you've seen in some of the parents that you've seen in your life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because on the if you have an unsupportive workplace and a supportive partner, and that was very much the situation we were starting out in,
Yep.
right? In this scenario, there were definitely small things that we did that were able to give him more of a role within the space that he had, right?
Yeah.
Like he was the one who took her to the music and me or whatever class on Saturday mornings. That was his thing, so you can find little pockets. The supportive workplace and the gatekeeping partner sort of scenario, I do hear about that a lot from fathers, right?
Yeah.
And what not shocked me, but what's one of the surprises when I released the book was how much people entered the conversation that I wanted to have in the book from the place of, we can't figure out how to share the work at home, right?
Yeah.
He wants to be involved. I want him involved, but we can't figure out how to do that because women in particular get caught up in the cultural norms about what mothers should be doing, right? Which is where a lot of that gatekeeping behavior comes from.
Yep.
And keeps fathers out.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's a very sticky nut, and it's very much one of the primary pain points that people would come to me with when they read the book.
Yeah.
That's what they felt the most. Like, how do we fix this? Sharing the work at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, this is a while ago that you were probably doling out advice around this. Does some advice come to your mind about how to help people engage in that conversation as a couple and start thinking in new ways?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things off the top of my head is I think it helps actually to literally write down on a piece of paper the work that needs to get done at home, and not just the work that needs to get done, but the caring, right? That you get to do, right? So that you can look sort of objectively, right? One of the things David and I did early on was we did that and we looked at it and we're like, okay, he's still working at that point, 50 hours a week, right? And he can't do a lot of the things I do every day. But I said to him, and this is another piece of advice, I was like, what I really want is I want you to take something that is your responsibility, not just a task that I delegate to you and that I keep track of and, manage, but something that I don't have to think about, right?
Yeah.
It's all yours. And he was like, sure. And so he took meal planning and grocery shopping because he could do it on the weekend, right? And he got totally into it. And he wasn't great at it at first, but he got really good at it. And so those two things I would highlight as pieces of advice. Like, it's not crazy to put it down on a piece of paper so that you can look at it together in sort of an objective way.
Yeah.
And to really talk about responsibility, not just the tasks.
Yeah.
Who has responsibility? Because if you're the one thinking about the thing and monitoring it, and is it done well enough, that's still your responsibility. For the mother. You want to give that responsibility to dad.
Yeah, and let go of it. And I think that you just hit the nail on the head. It's kind of really shedding something that you don't have to think about anymore. Typically, we then think that men are the ones who are maybe not going to do it right to begin with, but I'm the one who does cleaning in my household. And I can always tell when we're going through a really bad period of work-life balance for me personally, because our house starts looking like trash.
Right.
And my husband doesn't complain because it's, it's my job. And so he knows that, I'm going to get through this difficult work period and then the house will look better. And when he's in charge of cooking, and sometimes there'll be a week or two that we eat a lot of takeout, and that means that he's a little overwhelmed. And, we have to be a little bit, give a little bit in how we make this all work. So great. There's another trick you guys can do as you're listening in today is to think about where your kids will be in 5 years. Literally imagine them 5 years older and have a conversation with a glass of wine saying, what do we really want our lives to look like when our child is X age? Because what it helps you see is that time flies and you can start visualizing where you want to go. And that will help you get on that same page too. So wonderful. Yes. All right. So the practical things around how they made some changes. And and, some inspiration about how they really were talking about creating a marriage that was meaningful for them. What I want to talk about is, how did you go? You kind of realized, okay, we need to change things. And it wasn't like a direct line. You said, we need to change things, and then you did ABC, and it all worked. There were some bumps in trying to make change. Before you tell the story about trial 1 and trial 2, which we've got written up real quickly there, the big message I want people to hear is, it takes time to make change.
Yes.
And so what you'll hear in her story is that they created time to think about this personally and collectively to make these changes. So tell us a little bit about some of the way you were at that really bad place, and then you wanted to get to the better place. What happened?
Yeah, we were at that place. We realized, both of us realized that our marriage was at stake, and that was really the motivator for us. Like, that was the thing we were just not willing, that made us feel like we had to do the work, right, to save that. And so we sat down and we talked again about that fairy tale ending that we wanted, right? And we confirmed that, yes, in fact, this is still what we both want, right? We want to share the work. We want to both have careers. We both want to have time with Kate. And we, in talking about it, agreed too that the biggest barrier to what we wanted was, in fact, the job that David had. The biggest barrier to him having time with his child, the biggest barrier to my career moving forward was actually his job. And I think that's important because a lot of times women go into this assuming that their jobs are the ones that have to change to make it all work, right? And it was absolutely the case for us that that was the first domino, was his job. And so we sort of started on a 2-year plan to make changes. And we started that by literally handing the kid off to grandma for a day and going in separate rooms in the house and writing down in detail what each of us wanted in an ideal employment situation, sort of mini business plans. Like, that sounds overly formalized, but it was really just both of us getting some time to think about what's our ideal. And David identified that he really wanted to look at starting his own business. He'd always wanted that. He's always wanted to be entrepreneurial. That would be more fulfilling. He started seeing a career coach to think about that. And I realized, I really wanted to do the kind of consulting I was doing in corporate world for nonprofits and higher education. So I really wanted my own business too. And so that's sort of where we started, is like, let's articulate our ideal so that each of us understands what the other one is going for, even if it will take us a while to get there. So I'll pause there. Do you want me to keep going?
Well, so at some point, maybe as part of the master plan to have your own businesses, David went ahead and asked for a change at work?
Yes. So what happened is, as he was seeing a career coach, he got a job offer from another law firm because he was also exploring other law firm options. And he ended up going back to his current employer and using that as leverage to say, fine, you don't want me to leave? Then give me a 90% schedule, which again is like still a 60-hour work week, right?
Yeah.
But it gave him and us just a little bit of breathing room, right? Just enough breathing room for him to have the time to continue thinking about his career, right? For him to have a little bit more time at home, a little bit less stress. And that made a big difference, both because it was very real, the number of hours, even though it was very quickly clear that they had sidelined him at work for taking a quote unquote part-time schedule. But it was also important because it gave us a victory, right? It gave us a win, and a win where I knew that he was in it for real, right? He was willing to do that. And it got us something. It was a small gain, but it was a gain. And that was really helpful in terms of motivating us for the next steps. Yeah.
And there's just so many lessons learned there. So one to underscore is that you both started taking time to visualize what kind of work would you like to do, and how could you do it in a way where it really fits together around your goals around both work and family.
Yes.
Also what I hear is you had kind of plan A and plan B happening, like, hey, getting support from a career coach, that's another great thing. And then with that career coach exploring, hey, plan A might be just a different law firm helps me make this, accomplish this. Or maybe it's starting my own business. And you were talking together about those things, so they weren't big surprises. You were kind of supporting each other to take the next steps around thinking about these things. In fact, in your book, you have a really great list of kind of like, how do you make change? We've covered a couple of these, but there's such a great list. It's probably worth saying a couple. Let me just see. We've talked about, start by getting clear about what's your ideal and how they'll fit together. What a great concept. Take some small steps so everybody can, feel better. There was a pain point of you being so alone and exhausted by the care of Kate, that by making some changes, I think you even started using some part-time childcare just to give you a little bit more breathing room. Is that right, too?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't earning anything yet, it gave me time to work on volunteer stuff, to do some writing, to, relieve some of that.
Yeah. Again and again, a big message around finding some time for yourself as a couple to think about these. You've heard her talk about how they would, then check in. Actually, you had a pretty cool, maybe it was just for a while, you had something once a year you'd kind of think about your plans together. There was something you talked about, I think, in the book.
Yeah, we have a New Year's dinner every year, my husband and I, where we sort of review the year and then look ahead. So annually we do that, and now we do that as a family, the three of us. So that's a tradition for us now. In addition, my husband and I, especially at these key critical change points, would make time for like even just the 15-20 minute coffee once a week.
Yeah.
Just the two of us, even if it's when she's taking a nap or outside playing.
Yeah.
To check in.
Yeah.
Right? How's it going? How are you feeling? Is there anything we need to deal with that we haven't dealt with yet between the two of us, or big picture? And we literally scheduled it, right? Yeah. Now we don't need to do that as much because it's kind of a habit, but early on and when it was intense, we literally scheduled regular time.
Yeah.
To check in with each other. Yeah.
In fact, people who've listened to previous Thursday webinars know that one of the best gifts my mother-in-law gave Jeff and me was a regular Friday night date where she would take the kids until Saturday morning, because mostly it was a time for us to really sit down and talk about work and talk about family and kind of catch up on all the different things that are happening in our lives. And that was something I'd like to be able to, one day if I become a grandmother, that would be something I'd like to offer to my kids too. Well, cool. Yep. So we're getting close to the end of your story. Anything you would add about, some of these last ideas, investing in these change and getting some volunteer work if you're not employed, or getting help from family and friends, or celebrating small victories? Any particular important lessons around those that you think are worth underscoring, or are we ready for the next slide?
No, I think we're ready.
Okay, great. A really good list. I really liked it. Thank you so much. All right, sure. Let's see. Let's see if we can do that. All right, so they started a journey. There was definitely some really challenging bumps in the middle. And again, I appreciate your transparency in your book, because I think there's probably many people who are going through that even today. But they embarked on a new plan. And there was the today of at the end of the book, they both started their own businesses, but there's a today of today. So where are you today? And tell us a little bit about how's it working? How's it working for you? How's it working for David?
Well, it's working really well at the moment, but it was another, difficult, unpredictable surprise, arc with surprises. I mean, my book was published or sent off to be published just as the recession hit, right? Mm-hmm. And I was sending it off to the publisher in sort of late 2008. Our next wedding was in early 2008. And my husband's business that he started was in real estate. Mm-hmm. And so it cratered. And I ended up taking a salaried job for a year that I didn't really want, simply so that we would have a regular paycheck that we needed at the time. And I look back and I think, thank God I was consulting at the time, because I actually had the lead for a job, right? Mm-hmm. I was in enough, right, to get a lead on a regular job. And so it was a really tough time on us financially, and stress at home and everything. And David looked for a job for months and months, and then found one on the other side of Los Angeles with a 90-minute commute each way, mm-hmm. right? So mm-hmm. It was this big job. I had this salaried job. And then 2 weeks after he started that job, my father-in-law, just a month out of his retirement, had a massive brain hemorrhage coming out of brain surgery. And he was in the ICU for 9 days, completely unresponsive. Mm-hmm. And David couldn't be here at all during mm-hmm. that time. Mm-hmm. He was on the other side of town in a new job. And so I took 2 weeks off to camp out at the hospital, take care of my mother-in-law, and figure out how to strong arm my father-in-law into the rehabilitation facility he would need. And so, this is one of those, it was one of those years where the real life threw everything at you.
Yep.
And we survived it. And because David started his job, I then quit the one I hated and ramped up my consulting for several years to help dig us out of that recession hole. So we had a couple of years there where we both had to work more than we wanted. But the good thing is that we had the conversational tools to be able to talk with each other about, we know we're working more than we want to combined. We know some other things are going to slide. The laundry's not going to get done. We are still on the same team, and we're going to figure it out. And so this was also just as our daughter was, in middle school and entering high school. And as I mentioned, we realized, oh crap, now she has a workload, right? She has stress, she has homework, she has things she needs to fit in. And she also started to experience some struggles with her mental health, with some anxiety and related issues that required my attention. And so a couple of years ago, with David safely set up and in fact another job at a law firm, a much better one, we talked about it and we decided I was going to scale back for a little bit. We sort of recovered financially, and we said, she's only home with us for 3 more years. She needs the support. David was working more. We can't all three be stressed out and overworked. So that whole sequence of time, like the last 8 years or so, were just really a big lesson in how much caring happens throughout your life and takes lots of different shapes. It can come out of the blue and require your full attention for some unpredictable period of time, right?
Yep.
And what got us through is that the vision was still the same. We still have family dinners together most nights, even though our daughter's a senior in high school. We both are pursuing our careers. My consulting business and my nonprofit work are really healthy, but they're at a scale that makes sense for our family right now.
Yep.
We have time with Kate. We have time with each other. And this time through this challenge, we always felt like we were on the same team, even at its worst.
Yep.
And that was worth gold.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, no, absolutely. There's a little background noise maybe from a caller, if you can mute yourself. All right, I don't know if I'm going to be able to mute you. So we are definitely hearing some background noise. Let's see, I forgot to mute all, hold on. That's what I forgot to do. So Kristin, I've muted all except for you, so I should be able to still hear you talking. Great, wonderful. Yes. All right, and so that's that. Thank you. That is the truth. That's what we've learned in 17 years of running Third Path Institute, is that this is a across the life cycle challenge, and many surprises along the way. But what you guys had figured out was really how to feel like a team at home to manage those challenges that were thrown at you. So this is going to be the place in the call where I want to see if people have a question for you before we go to the next very important point, that the decisions we're making today, the personal is political, and that we can really, by encouraging men's involvement with caregiving, by creating those teams at home, we think we're going to be really starting to help create better public policy, where we see the public policy be something that supports men and women to really be involved with family well-being, and as a result, really supports gender equality. So that's where we're going to go next, is kind of talking about how Kristin, yes, was telling her personal story, but there was a political story too, and to think a little bit about what steps we can take to advance things so our sons and daughters have better choices. But before we do that, there might be somebody listening in today who has a question for Kristin. And as part of our live webinars, you get a chance to talk to our amazing speakers. So I'm going to stop the recording, see who has a question, and then we'll continue the recording after this. Okay. So we're at the point in our webinar where we're going to talk a little bit about how the personal is political. And what we're really driving at is, yes, we want gender equality, but we also want to do it in a way where there continues to be family well-being. And by the way, a simple solution for that is to really encourage men's equal involvement in caregiving. So what we've learned at Third Path, and I really feel like Kristin's book supports it, is that the actions we take in our everyday lives can actually help influence how we think in a smarter way around public policy. And so, yes, the arrow could be thought about that the public policy and all those things impact us, but we believe also that we can impact public policy. And so what are some things that we can do? There might be others you want to add to the list, but you had a really good point that one thing we can do is talk to our congresspersons, our state representatives. What are some other things that people can do to think in a smart way and influence things to be different for our sons and daughters?
Well, I will start by agreeing with you that, you know, what we do in our personal lives matters in the big picture in terms of changing things. And it often doesn't feel like that. But I absolutely, in my, you know, whatever wisdom I've gained, believe that the culture is going to need to change before we get major changes in public policy. And so what you are doing each day with your family, the conversations you're having with within your family, outside of your family, absolutely matter. Some of the things that I think we can do that sort of step out of that is that sphere of influence is we're at kind of a particularly unique political moment in time. And I believe that there are lots of people running for office right now at every level. I'm not just talking about Congress or anything like that. I'm talking about like your local city council who want to do good things and probably, you know, think, oh, I support paid leave, right? Or I support equal pay. And we need to get people that are running for office to think about these issues in ways that go beyond the sound bites that are typical, and really understand that caregiving is a lifelong thing and not a 6-week for mom after you have a baby thing, about the fact that men also need to be able to provide for care. And so having conversations locally with local politicians, with your local political organizations, with local nonprofit organizations, like that matters, because giving people the language and the stories to use to change how we think about this, I think is really important. And I just think there's a unique moment in time right now, because a lot of people are listening, and a lot of the issues that are prominent right now are very much connected to all of these issues. You know, healthcare, for example, decoupling healthcare from employers is an absolutely critical step to removing the barriers that men and women face in creating job options that aren't the 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that connection isn't often made.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of helping people see, local political people see those connections and have your story, can make a big difference. Yeah.
Well said. Really well said. And here's the unfortunate truth. I looked at the time and I'm like, wow, we're almost out of time. So, you know, she said it well. This is something that's across the life cycle. This year on our Thursday webinars, we're really trying to help you imagine how you can do it differently across the life cycle. And by having conversations with local and regional political people about how you're doing it differently, why it's important to do it differently, will help us hopefully make a difference for the next generation. If you're someone who's passionate about this stuff, you should join us in April. We've got an amazing event every 2 years where our career counselors and couples counselors, or just passionate individuals, get together and think about how we can help promote more work-life integration for men and women across the life cycle. We've also got a series of additional webinars coming up that really are going to help you think in smart ways around these issues, including a great one in April about money and work-life integration. So there's some important takeaways. I hope you're inspired that change is possible, that it keeps on changing because kids and jobs change, that you really, once you get on the same page with your partner, it can really be valuable as you continue along and face the next challenges. Any other last takeaways you'd like to add to this, Kristin?
Just a couple. Keep the faith, keep the hope. It is possible. I am very easy to find on Facebook and Twitter. If anybody has any questions or wants to have a conversation, it is not hard to find me online.
Great.
And if you like this conversation too, I also have a TEDx talk on my website, also easy to find online, about unconscious bias that really incorporates these themes around mothers and fathers.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I hope people take you up on that because you have brought so much wisdom to this conversation today through your book, and I'm sure your TED Talk is awesome too. So thank you. We've had a great conversation, and I look forward to our next webinar in a month. I hope everybody will join us. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having me.